Okay, so I finally got around to The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And years ago when I facilitated Girl Power at the YWCA, I do remember reading part of it, actually before that, because I remember recognizing it. So 2010 is when this book came out, and I guess the author first learned about her in 1988, and who she is she's a woman whose cervical cancer cells were harvested and made immortal. They are used in virtually every kind of medicine. Even medicines you wouldn't think would make sense to use cervical cancer cells, but I believe the purpose of it is to have a linear cell, because the author did explain that Johns Hopkins out of Baltimore, Maryland, did then seek data from her children. She had 5 children, and she married her first cousin. So that's I'm not gonna read too much more of this book right now, because my sympathy and my empathy really go out the window when a family lets their first cousins marry. And it was facilitated by the family. And it was actually, who knows what direction it went, because Henrietta was older than her first cousin who she married and had 5 children with. So just I'd like to opt out, and I think most people would opt out of having this medicine. Let me read a little bit of it. And I'm probably gonna post this video on both my YouTubes, because I'm saving up for a phone to have everything in one place, as I've just gotten back on my feet. Ooh, this was cool though. So her family, actually, where she was raised in Clover, Virginia, on a tobacco farm, they inherited or won their freedom like a lot of slaves did. It was actually an apprenticeship. So not all slavery was just how people see slavery. It would be learn a skill and then this land is yours. And so that happened with a lot of plantations, not all of them, but it did. And so that's very interesting to read about, because Black America, white America, anybody really doesn't like to talk about the fact that a lot of Blacks who inherited their plantations, a lot of that was set up either after emancipation or beforehand. So it depended on who owned the land, and how God-fearing the people were, because it was not everybody who thought of Blacks as less than. It was some, but it was not all. And you could argue a majority, and that's just fine. I'm arguing, not a majority. Most people had their own farms and just wanted to do their own thing. But for the 1% of people in the mid-1800s who had slaves, it was a case-by-case basis. So that was really cool to learn, because she grew up harvesting tobacco. What a dream, right? Except for the fact that, again, she was just allowed to marry her first cousin. Everything so far in the book suggests that for her family that was normal, which is disgusting. So I really don't have a lot of sympathy, again, for them in general, except for the fact that it is immoral to lie to people about harvesting their cells, keeping them alive. And this was the most horrific fact. Her cells today have multiplied so much that they weigh 50 million metric tons. Now this is 2010, so they probably weigh more than that. And her daughter, Deborah, so her daughter was 1 year old when she died, because Henrietta died soon after. The doctor at Johns Hopkins was like, oh, this is very unique. And then they harvested it without telling her. And then her cells were the only ones to survive because they were trying to keep cells alive in a culture, and cancer cells, you know, they make more cancer cells multiply. And so hers were the only ones to just keep multiplying. And then they just keep feeding them nutrients. They said you can buy a vial of her cells for $25. That's quite the deal. And so, yeah, I'm going to be a little crass because, again, she married her first cousin. Okay. And the author, because the author is white, and the author doesn't want to criticize Black America, which is insulting. That is bigotry, when you think less of somebody, that they can't handle your criticism of them. That's what's bigoted. So this author is a little bigoted, but it's still really, really good writing. And so she talks about how in 1988, when she was a 16-year-old having to go to an alternative school, that only one professor had mentioned her name. She was able to find Henrietta Lacks's name in one textbook, and then she didn't hear about her again until the internet came out in the 90s, and then a bunch of the information was wrong. She finished her biology degree, and then she went on to writing master's, and then in 2010 gifted us this book after doing 1,000 hours of interviews. So Deborah, Henrietta's child, who died when she was 1 or like 1.5, because this woman just was pumping out babies. She was pumping out babies. Also, they have a lot of other relatives because her cousin husband was sleeping with other women. So yeah, though, back to Deborah. Deborah worked with this author, shared her diaries, and so it's amazing because you get to see direct quotes from Henrietta, from Deborah, and yeah, Deborah, and this is what I think I've read before because I remember ruminating on it so much. Deborah is very religious. So these are Black Southern Christians, except like many Black Southern Christians, there's sometimes a voodoo element to their practice. So Deborah believes that the spirit of her mother lives in anybody who takes medicine that's made directly from Henrietta's cells, which is billions of people. And so Deborah is talking to the author at one point, and that's the part I want to find. Oh, I missed a page about Deborah. Okay, right before part 1, there's Deborah's voice. I'm just going to read this. Deborah's voice. When people ask, and seems like people always be asking, to where I can't never get away from it, I say yeah. So these are Deborah's words. I say, yeah, that's right. My mother was Henrietta Lacks. She died in 1951. Johns Hopkins took her cells, and them cells are still living today, still multiplying, still growing, and spreading if you don't keep them frozen. Science calls her cells HeLa, and she's all over the world in medical facilities, in all the computers and the internet everywhere. When I go to the doctor for my checkup, I always say my mother was HeLa. They get all excited. tell me stuff like how her cells helped make my blood pressure medicines and anti-depression pills, and how this important stuff in science happened because of her. But they don't never explain more than just saying, yeah, your mother was on the moon. Her cells were sent to space. Your mother was on the moon. She'd been in nuclear bombs and made that polio vaccine. I really don't know how she did all that, but I guess I'm glad she did, because that means she helped lots of people. I think she would like that. Well, that's some heavy denial, Deborah. But I always have thought it was strange. If our mother's cells done so much for medicine, how come her family can't afford to see no doctors? Don't make no sense. People got rich off my mother without us ever knowing about them taking her cells. Now we don't get a dime. I used to get so mad about that to where it made me sick. I had to take pills. But I don't got it in me no more to fight. I just want to know who my mother was. Yeah, ignorance is a choice. It's a choice. We have the internet. Jesus Christ, everybody. Okay. This is the part, though, where Deborah speaks more to her voodoo side, where she's not happy that her mom's cells are just helping people. And they're not. Antidepressants don't work. I will find it. Okay, it must have been in the prologue, like one of the first things I read. Well, okay, this part I'll actually read while I'm looking for it. This is important. Her cells were part of research into the genes that cause cancer and those that suppress it. They helped develop drugs for treating herpes, leukemia, influenza, hemophilia, and Parkinson's disease. They have been used to study lactose digestion, sexually transmitted diseases, appendicitis, human longevity, mosquito mating, and the negative cellular effects of working in sewers. Henrietta's chromosomes and proteins have been studied with such detail and precision that scientists know their every quirk. Like guinea pigs and mice, Henrietta's cells have become the standard laboratory workforce. Okay, and this is when she talks about first finding the people on the internet who knew Henrietta's name. So Ebony magazine, which is a Black American magazine, quoted her husband, her first cousin, saying, "All I remember is that she had this disease, and right after she died, they called me in the office wanting to get my permission to take a sample of some kind. I decided not to let them." Jet, which I think is like another like ladies magazine, said the family was angry that Henrietta cells were being sold for $25 a vial, and angry that articles had been published about the cells without their knowledge. Okay, this is the part about Deborah. So Deborah and I came from different cultures. I grew up white and agnostic in the Pacific Northwest. My roots half New York Jew, half Midwestern Protestant. Deborah was a deeply religious Black Christian from the South. I tended to leave the room when religion came up in conversation because it made me uncomfortable. Deborah's family tended toward preaching, faith healings, and sometimes voodoo. She grew up in a black neighborhood that was one of the poorest and most dangerous in the country. And then I grew up in a safe, quiet, middle-class neighborhood in a predominantly white city, blah, 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 talking about how she grew up white. Okay, so Deborah believed Henrietta's spirit lived on in her cells, controlling the life of anyone who crossed its path, including me. This needs to be a movie yesterday. in that narrative of her daughter, of Deborah, when Deborah's in this opinion. So Deborah's quoted saying, "How else do you explain why your science teacher knew her real name?" Because she was given two other names, Helen Zane or something else. And like I said, it was the only teacher that knew her name. So that's kind of interesting. To quote Deborah again, "How else do you explain why your science teacher knew her real name when everybody else called her Helen Lane?" Deborah would say. Quoting Deborah again, "She was trying to get your attention," end quote. And then, I like this part, "Thinking this would apply to everything in life, when I married while writing this book, it was because Henrietta wanted someone to take care of me while I worked. When I divorced, it was because she decided he was getting in the way of the book. When an editor who insisted I take the Lax family out of the book was injured in a mysterious accident, Deborah said, that's what happens when you piss Henrietta off." And on many occasions, over a decade ago, learning about Henrietta, I have felt that same notion that this woman, because she is in my body, like I felt like her spirit. And so that needs to be a movie, the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And it's a real shame that Black America has yet to honor the memory of this incredible woman who had an incredible crime committed against her and her family. And I spoiler alert, they did win the court case and they settled for millions. They could not stop her cells being used, which I think is the real goal of the Lax family. And I'll have to look up recent comments from them if there are any. I think the court case came in like 2014. But I think the real goal is to end her immortal life because her daughter actually seemed deeply bothered that her mother's spirit was kept alive in the bodies of everybody. And again, you should have the option to like opt out of having a dead woman's genes in your body.